Camille had always known that climbing the corporate ladder wouldn't be easy, especially for a Black woman at Apex Innovations Corp., a leading tech company in Seattle. Her talent and dedication made her stand out, but it also put her in the crosshairs of prejudice. She was used to the lingering stares and hushed whispers that seemed to follow her, but none were as relentless as her boss, Mr. Harrison. From her first day, it was clear he didn't believe she belonged. His snide comments about her appearance and veiled insults about her place in the company's culture were constant. Yet, Camille stood tall, swallowed her pride, and excelled at her job, refusing to let his negativity define her. What no one knew was that Camille was on the verge of a monumental change. After years of relentless hard work, overcoming obstacles, and delivering impeccable results, she was about to be promoted. The company's board, based out of state, had been watching her closely. They saw her potential and decided that Camille would become the new CEO, making her not only one of the youngest, but also the first Black woman to hold the position at Apex Innovations. The process had been kept under wraps to observe reactions, especially from people like Mr. Harrison, who remained clueless about what was happening. Oblivious to the upcoming changes, Mr. Harrison continued to believe he held all the power over Camille and other employees he looked down on. Every day, Camille faced new challenges as Harrison made every effort to create a hostile work environment. He belittled her accomplishments in front of others and, when particularly frustrated, masked racist remarks as jokes. It was difficult to endure, but Camille persevered, knowing that soon everything would be different. That morning, however, things were about to come to a head in a way Mr. Harrison could never have predicted. The office buzzed with activity as Apex Innovations was on the brink of a major product launch. Camille had been leading the charge, pouring in endless hours to perfect every detail. She worked late into the nights, gave up her weekends, and sacrificed her personal time because she was committed to excellence. Yet, as always, Mr. Harrison refused to acknowledge her contributions. Instead, he felt threatened by her success and worked to undermine her whenever possible. Though he knew she was one of the company's top performers, he never admitted it publicly, preferring to tear her down and create a toxic atmosphere that sapped the team's morale. As Camille entered the conference room that morning for a crucial presentation, she saw Harrison already seated, his face twisted with his usual look of disdain. The room was filled with executives and team members, all awaiting her report. "Do you really think you're ready for this, Camille?" he asked with a sneer. "This project is critical. I can't afford to let you screw it up." The room fell silent. Her colleagues, used to his insults, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, too afraid to speak up. Camille remained calm, as she always did. She had faced this kind of hostility before and knew that showing anger would only give him more ammunition. But something inside her was changing. Perhaps it was the weight of the secret she carried, or maybe it was the years of putting up with his cruelty. Either way, Camille felt a new sense of strength rise within her. "I'm more than ready," she said confidently, standing tall as she launched into her presentation. She spoke clearly and with authority, guiding everyone through her slides that showcased her deep knowledge and innovative ideas. No matter how many times Harrison tried to interrupt, Camille stayed focused, refusing to let him distract her. But Mr. Harrison wasn't about to back down. When the presentation ended, he stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. "That's enough," he snapped, his voice barely hiding his anger. "You're not cut out for this, Camille. You never have been. And it's only a matter of time before everyone else sees that too." The room grew tense, and for a brief moment, Camille felt the familiar surge of anger and frustration she had become all too accustomed to. She had been through this scenario before. But today, something felt different. Then Mr. Harrison did something that would set off a chain of events neither of them could have anticipated. "Unthinkable," Harrison said, his voice now icy and controlled, a cold smirk forming on his face. "I consider this your last chance. Your performance has been nothing but disappointing, and I can't continue pretending you bring any value to this team. You're fired." His words cut through the room like a knife, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Camille felt the crushing weight of the injustice. It was a low, cruel blow, but the worst part was that Harrison had no idea what was about to happen. She paused for a few moments, her colleagues watching her, their faces painted with sympathy and fear, waiting to see how she would react. Deep inside, Camille knew she didn't need to fight back, not now. Something much bigger was on the horizon. With a calm smile, she stood up, gathered her belongings, and quietly left the room without uttering a single word. The storm was brewing, but this time, she would be the one in control. As she sat in the back of a taxi heading home, a swirl of emotions overtook her. Being fired, humiliated in front of her colleagues, and enduring Harrison's verbal assault, it all stung. But beneath that sting was an unexpected sense of peace. Harrison had no clue what was coming his way. She stared out of the window as the city of Seattle blurred past, her mind racing with thoughts of the next day. The announcement of her new role as CEO would be made public tomorrow, and the shock it would send through the office, particularly to Harrison, would just be the beginning. When Camille arrived home, her phone rang. It was Mr. Whitmore, the president of the Apex Innovations board. He was one of the few people who knew about her promotion and was eager to check in. "Camille, how are you feeling?" "Tomorrow's a big day," he said in a warm, reassuring tone. Camille exhaled, explaining the situation with Harrison. She braced herself for Mr. Whitmore to be shocked, but instead, he chuckled softly. "We expected something like this from him," he said. "That's exactly why your appointment as CEO is so important." The next morning, Camille entered the company building with her head held high. She'd been invited to a meeting with the board and top executives, one that would change the company's leadership forever. As expected, Harrison had not been informed. He was likely still basking in what he believed was his victory, completely unaware of how drastically his world was about to shift. As Camille stepped into the boardroom, the board members were already present, and Harrison sat confidently at the head of the table. He wore an expression of smug superiority, clearly believing his position was secure. He glanced up at Camille as she entered, oblivious to what was about to unfold. The board president began speaking, giving a brief overview of the company's current state and the challenges ahead. He paused for dramatic effect before continuing. "We're here today to introduce a new chapter of leadership for Apex Innovations. Our next CEO has been carefully selected based on their commitment, strategic vision, and dedication to fostering innovation and diversity." Camille could see Harrison out of the corner of her eye. He seemed distracted, completely unaware of the bombshell that was about to be dropped. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat and, with a sense of pride, announced, "It is with great honor that I introduce Camille Roberts as the new CEO of Apex Innovations Corporation." The reaction was instantaneous. Harrison froze, his smug expression vanishing, replaced with sheer disbelief. He stared at Camille, his face drained of color, as if he couldn't comprehend what he had just heard. "This has to be a joke," he mumbled, standing up in shock. "There's no way this is real. This must be a mistake." The entire room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to Harrison. Camille rose from her seat, her gaze fixed on him, calm but resolute. "No, Mr. Harrison, this is not a mistake," she said firmly, her voice steady. "But what has been a mistake is something else, something we will be addressing shortly." Harrison looked around the room, desperately searching for support from his fellow executives. But all he found were neutral expressions. No one was willing to side with him now that he'd been exposed. His confidence, once unshakable, was unraveling before his eyes. The power he had wielded over Camille and the rest of the team was slipping away. With complete control of the moment, Camille nodded to Mr. Whitmore, who continued. "There's one more matter we need to discuss," Mr. Whitmore said. "Mr. Harrison's behavior over the years has been unacceptable. We have received multiple complaints regarding racist comments, harassment, and creating a toxic work environment. As CEO, Ms. Roberts now has the responsibility to address these issues." Harrison's eyes widened in panic as the reality of his situation set in. He was cornered, and he knew it. "You can't do this," he stammered, trying to regain control. "Unthinkable," Harrison hissed, his voice dripping with cold disdain, a smug grin twisting his lips. "This is your last chance. Your work has been nothing short of a failure, and I can't keep pretending you add any value to this team. You're fired." His words sliced through the air, leaving the room in stunned silence. Camille felt the weight of the injustice settle on her shoulders. It was a cruel and calculated blow, but the most shocking part was that Harrison had no idea what was coming. She stood still for a moment, her colleagues staring at her, their faces filled with a mix of sympathy and fear, waiting for her reaction. Deep down, Camille knew she didn't need to fight this battle, not now. Something far bigger was waiting for her. With a calm, collected smile, she stood up, gathered her things, and walked out of the room without uttering a single word. The storm was brewing, but this time, Camille would be the one steering it. As she sat in the back of a taxi heading home, her emotions swirled. The sting of being fired in front of her peers, the public humiliation, and the sharpness of Harrison's words, all of it hurt. But amidst the pain was a surprising sense of calm. Harrison had no clue what was waiting for him. She watched the city blur past the window, her thoughts racing ahead to tomorrow. The news of her promotion to CEO would be out, and the shock it would send through the office, particularly to Harrison, was just the beginning. When she arrived home, her phone rang. It was Mr. Whitmore, the president of the Apex Innovations board. He was one of the few who knew about her promotion and was checking in before the big day. "Camille, how are you feeling?" "Tomorrow's a big day," he said, his voice warm and encouraging. Camille sighed, recounting the incident with Harrison. She expected Mr. Whitmore to be surprised, but instead, he let out a soft chuckle. "We knew he might pull something like this," he said. "That's exactly why your appointment as CEO is so important." The next morning, Camille walked into the office with her head held high. She had been summoned to a meeting with the board and senior executives, a meeting that would change the company's future. Harrison, as expected, hadn't been informed. He was probably still gloating over his so-called victory, oblivious to the massive shift about to take place. As Camille entered the boardroom, the board members were already seated, with Harrison lounging at the head of the table, exuding arrogance. He glanced up at her, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. The board president began speaking, outlining the company's current state and the challenges ahead. He paused for a moment, building anticipation before making the announcement. "We are here today to usher in a new era of leadership at Apex Innovations. Our next CEO has been carefully chosen based on their commitment, strategic vision, and dedication to innovation and diversity." Camille noticed Harrison out of the corner of her eye. He looked unfazed, clearly oblivious to the bombshell that was about to drop. Mr. Whitmore continued with a sense of pride. "It is with great pleasure that I introduce Camille Roberts as the new CEO of Apex Innovations Corporation." The reaction was instant. Harrison's face paled, his smug expression dissolving into one of sheer disbelief. He stared at Camille, speechless, as though he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. "This can't be real," he muttered, standing up, his voice shaking with shock. "There must be some mistake." The room went still, and all eyes turned toward Harrison. Camille stood, her gaze steady and unwavering. "No, Mr. Harrison," she said firmly, her voice cool and controlled. "There's no mistake. But we do have some things to address, and that will happen soon." Harrison's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but all he found were blank stares. No one was willing to back him now. His confidence, once ironclad, began to crumble as the reality of his situation set in. The power he once held over Camille and the rest of the team was slipping from his grasp. Camille, fully in command of the situation, gave a nod to Mr. Whitmore, who continued. "There is one more issue we need to discuss," Mr. Whitmore said. "Over the years, we have received multiple complaints about Mr. Harrison's behavior, including his racist remarks, harassment, and toxic leadership. As the new CEO, Ms. Roberts is tasked with addressing these complaints." Harrison's face drained of color, his wide eyes reflecting the panic that was now rising inside him. "You can't do this," he stammered, desperately trying to regain control.